Okay. All right. I'm live. Okay. Fantastic. Peace. Peace. This is King Khalil Speaks channel. Um, and this is one of my very early um, spoken word of poetry through my journey from darkness into light. And this expresses the power of addiction, the power that programming and patterns have over our lives. And in many instances, we're governed by forces and influences that we're not even conscious of. There's the hidden, there is the public, the private, and the hidden, or the subconscious, or the conscious and the subconscious, and the unconscious. Um, and we have these layers of consciousness. In many instances, the subconscious mind is hundreds of thousands of times more powerful than the conscious mind. And the power of the subconscious mind is that it takes in everything. And we have proof of that by putting a person that can't remember something, but we can put them into a state of hypnosis and have them recall events that they weren't conscious of because they're still recorded in the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind records everything that you smell, touch, taste, feel, hear through any of your senses, which govern our life forces, for lack of a better term, because that's how we know we're alive. We smell, we taste, we touch, and we feel. And one of the most powerful organs in the body. Okay, matter of fact, it's a question. What is the most powerful force in the body? Is it the mind or is it the heart? So, chemically speaking, you have the electromagnetic, because we're creatures, we're energy, all particles and energy. Um, uh, and we have an electromagnetic field around us. We have a chemical electrical process that happens in the brain, the neurons and the pathways that travel from what we feel, and it travels what we see. It travels through chemical electrical exchange of chemicals and electrical process. Um, and the science now tells us that the strongest electrical magnetic force in the body is the beating heart, almost like a battery. And we have in a lot of the literature, we have what they call the understanding heart, because the heart, um, in many instances, is more powerful than the mind or the subconscious. The heart is, uh, you say, I know it by heart. Um, because what you're really saying is that you've imprinted it, and it's been imprinted upon your subconscious mind, that it becomes a permanent memory. Isn't that what happens to a child in its formative years, in its developmental years? If it's hurt, it experiences emotional, psychological, or physical pain. The greater the pain, especially emotional, then the more of an imprint it has on the mind. In some sense, in the literature, um, the Quran warns about a heart that is made of stone, or a hard heart. Well, that means that the hard heart is insensitive. We want a heart that is alive, that's responsive, that's compassionate. And in many instances, we have to, as we come into our capacity to discriminate, in our capacity to have critical thinking and thought, we can examine uh, the contents of our heart and our minds. We could begin to brainwash ourselves and purify our hearts. Brainwash means going in and cleaning up all the clutter, all of this subconscious garbage, and reprogramming through our own self-talk. and in some instances, self-hypnosis. So let me express this poem, and then we're going to dissect it and see what we can, you know, glean from it, what we can possibly use as a building block or foundation of understanding as we build together. So this first poem, I was writing my book From Darkness into Light, and I seen how much of it was governed by the uh, my chemical uh, addiction. And I remember more specifically the chapter in my book called The Last Mother's Day, when my mother died from another chemical, alcohol. I was already in my addiction, but then I lost all control as I self medicated myself to escape from the emotional pain and the trauma of her death. So I eventually went into my first recovery after being incarcerated and forced into a treatment program. And I came out of there and I started writing. And I wrote this poem as my first writing shortest poem. And it says, the ritualistic thinking of a cracked dauphine mind, animalistic instincts perversely inclined. You keep moving in motion, yet stuck in time. Your life has no reason or rhyme because of creatures of habit over time. The ritualistic thinking of the cracked dauphine mind, animalistic instincts perversely inclined. You keep moving in motion, yet stuck in time. Your life has no rhythm or rhyme. Creatures of habit, hurt, and pain when you find. You keep reaching for hope, but coming up with slime. Why? Because of the ritualistic thinking of a cracked dauphine mind. So, ritualistic, we're creatures of habit in patterns that are very difficult because we become habituated or habitual behavior. You don't have to think about tying your shoe. It's automatic because it's imprinted on the mind. You know, if you want to know how trauma works and why it's so successful, because in your developmental stage, if you're hurt, the more that you feel something, the deeper that it penetrates into the subconscious mind. So if you're traumatized as a child through abuse, sometimes intentionally and maybe unintentionally, because they always tell us that a person that is the abusers, when you study their childhood, they were abused. And it produces another abuser. So, these are uh, the way that developmental psychology through um, clinical studies knows how this goes. So um, I just want to share this with you that the poem is speaking about animalistic instincts perversely inclined. Well, what is that? That is the mind. What part of the mind is the limbic stem or what they refer to as the reptilian stem, because that's the earliest development of the brain before it comes up into the mammalian, the mammal, mammalian, I believe is the way you pronounce it, but I know about the frontal cortex, the cerebral cortex. But the limbic stem is called the reptilian because it's the most primitive. And when you look into the reptilian world, snakes and crocodiles and lizards, when the offspring are born, they scatter because the mother will eat them, and any other reptilian that's around will consume them. Well, this is the way the crack works on the limbic system. It locks you into a pattern where you cannot leave the limbic primitive mode of more, because it drives your appetites unchecked by knowledge. Because you can't get to the knowledge because the knowledge is in the frontal lobe, but you get locked into the limbic system that just drives your appetites and drives unchecked by knowledge, and you want more and more until you reach a point of saturation. You can't even feel no more, but you'll continue in this frenzy of looking for uh, a dopamine rush. Um, and that is how habits are formed, because there's two motivations: the motivation towards pleasure and the motivation away from pain. And that's part of the formula of my recovery, is because the addiction became more painful than the traumatized self or the child. Because in us, we still have the child. We have, in the matter of fact, in what they call a transactional uh, psychology, or uh, it refers to the the parent, adult, and child. Um, and sometimes we make decisions on a rational level from the adult mode, and sometimes from an authoritarian, the parent. But when we get into our addiction, we're moving from the child mode, which is the primitive developmental stages of our life that were traumatized. We're moving there because we were never nurtured, we were never held comfort, we didn't receive love, compassion, or the warmth. Maybe because that was the same experience that the parent had, or lack of a parent. You know, it. So there's what we call dysfunctionality, and because it's not a complete unit to give both the masculine and feminine energies that will help the child in nourishing. Uh, uh, because we exist in these electronic fields, or the environmental influences. So this is not to say that anyone is bad or evil, because um, for all we know, uh, you know, when you see an abuser, well, when you study their history, uh, they were abused themselves, and they may not be as conscious, and sometimes they won't even remember the abuse. So what do you have to do? You have to hypnotize them, or under hypnosis, they can recall and remember what the mind suppressed and hid. But these are the things that drive us when we're in our addiction. We may not even remember or understand all of the influences that and the forces that acted upon us, that keep us into this pattern of ritualistic thinking, the ritualistic behavior of the Dauphine mind. And the reason that I said from Dauphine to King, because it took me a long time to have the self-esteem, the self-worth. And someone had suggested to me, "Oh, Khalil, you survived all that. You're a king," and I couldn't accept it because I wasn't used to conceptually seeing myself in a worthy way. Um, it was hard for me to be my friend, let alone love myself. I had to learn how to be my own friend and not to abuse myself through chemicals and drugs. And I only did that as a result of experiencing, hitting that wall that they speak about, but experiencing so much external pain as I began to heal my wounds, emotional wounds, psychological wounds. And I had quite a few physical wounds, but I didn't care about physical pain. It was the emotional pain that I was running from. Therefore, I had built this fortress. But as I had to go into myself, um, because that's the real vision that you have to have, is this inner vision, and you have to have the courage, in spite of fear. Courage is defined as being able to perform in spite of in spite of fear. What is fear? False evidence about reality or your perception. And you worry about something that may never happen. And you have anxiety about things that did happen, or anxiety, or you have stress about things that no longer exist, but you can't break out of the habitual behavior and thinking. And that's how addiction works as well. So you need help. That's why we have to come together collectively. And they say that it takes a village to raise a child. We have to have a community that is understanding, um, and understanding the processes and the things that lead us down these paths of chemical dependency. But we must also be mindful that this is a war. They wanted to say the war on drugs. Uh, I beg to differ, uh, because this was strategically and intentionally, and we have the history now to see that the drugs came into our community uh, through the CIA, Black Ops, the Iran-Contra war, or the Iran-Contra connections. It was all about the cocaine. The Mexican, the Afghanistan was about the poppy fields. And this is the real underground economy that kept, it's the underground economy. So that leads us into the public, the private, and the hidden. Well, it was this hidden economy of drugs that has kept our economy afloat. But that's another topic. Let's stay into the subconscious mind and the ritualistic thinking of a crack dope fiend mind. Okay, the ritualistic thinking of a crack dope fiend mind, animalistic instincts perversely inclined. Well, when you put these chemical mixtures in the I'm thinking of the chemicals, and I'm gonna go into that right now. So I just say the chemicals that are in the food, the chemicals that they're now putting into the drugs, they've been far removed from the opiate, the morphine, and now they're synthetics. Um, and you have a real epidemic of drugs because of fentanyl that is deadly. So we're being sidetracked into a pandemic, but the epidemic is killing more people. And we didn't shut the economy or shut the world down because of the pandemic, but they've altered the rules of the game because, as Malcolm said, the chickens have come home to roost. So the same people who made all the profits, the pharmaceutical companies and everyone else, now their children are being affected. It's always affected the melanated community. Uh, and, we took it part and partial, at least I did. At the age of 14, I was in the streets and I had already been an alcoholic because my stepfather, he sold moonshine and I used to steal it and take it out to my friends. And that was at 10 years old. And I would bring it out and we would, get intoxicated. And then, next thing I know, we were also, began to take pills more like goofballs. And they call them goofballs because you acted goofy. They were, uh, what we call them, Seconal. Um, uh, we had Black Beauties, which was amphetamines. And we would take this and we would drink and then smoke weed. Uh, and then at 14, I was introduced to heroin, and I bypassed the whole thing about snorting. And I went, I thought I was advanced. I went see the older guys, and they took me right in with them. And that's another area, but they injected the heroin, and it took me a few years before I realized that I was addicted. But nevertheless, uh, the ritualistic thinking of a cracked dope free mind, animalistic instincts, perverse and inclined. You keep moving in motion, yet stuck in time. Well, that stuck in time means that the minute that you begin to take in these chemicals, your emotional development stops because you're no longer feeling because you become desensitized. So when my mother passed, I overly medicated myself because I didn't want to feel anything. And when you don't feel, you can't mature emotionally. So you're stuck in time, right there. From the minute that you put that chemical in, you no longer experience uh, the the natural process of uh, expressing your emotions. Uh, you become, and I used to play with myself and say I'm emotionally retarded, but you know that's the truth. You're slowed down in your emotional development, and then you add on top of that uh, the behaviors are going to lead you into they say uh, uh, prison death or mental prison mental institutions of death. So then you put yourself in these other institutions, and now you're socially undeveloped. So you're emotionally undeveloped, you're socially undeveloped, and to some degree, depending on how much you've destroyed your body with all of these harmful drugs and chemicals, you might be physically wounded as well as emotionally and mentally. So it takes something. So you're stuck in time, and your life has no rhythm around. It's out of control. Creatures of habit, hurt and pain will you find, but you have moments of sanity, and you reach for hope, but you come up with slime because of the gravitational pull of the other distorted minds. They don't want to see you escape from the gravitational pull that has them captured. Even though you have moments of sanity, I gotta stop this, I gotta get out of this. But you don't have a way to do it. My process of doing that was I had to totally surrender. I could no longer think that my mind was going to, because it was too contaminated. So was my emotions, and everything else was traumatized. But nevertheless, when I began to go into or begin to understand that this was not a physical war, like they declared the war on drugs, which only incarcerated many of the melanated people. That's all that it was intended for, and that's another topic. But the whole prison industrial complex. Well, then we have to add the prison industrial Hollywood complex, because that's how they subliminally uh, through the social media, uh, through uh, the music, through the whole media, uh, they create this fictional reality um, that is mostly fiction and an illusion, uh, and that's another part of the matrix, where you're in this environment. And a matrix means a place of development. But when you're in an environment that you're being saturated subconsciously with all these messages and influences um, that are um, a fiction of reality, and you take on the values uh, to where um, you think you have to have certain uh, material things, the gravitational pull, the material plane, it's hard to break that gravitational pull. But then you have to understand that it's not physical warfare, but it's psychological warfare. And then at the highest level is spiritual warfare. So it's not that you're working on external things. Spiritual warfare is mostly working on internal. So you're no longer looking for power, you're looking for empowerment. So if when I was young, I thought when I had a gun that I had power, but I didn't realize that when they took the gun, then I no longer had the power. When I had money, I had power. I had jewelry, I had this or I had that. I thought I had power. But all those things were taken from me and can be taken from anyone, or you can lose it. But to be empowered is to have knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. In order for that to happen, you have to experience and go through struggles. Just like a weightlifter can't get stronger until he has resistance, and the weight is resistance. And you have to have struggles that you overcome, barriers, obstacles, and resistance that will make you mentally stronger. And it's paradoxical that it's in the spiritual realm, it's the opposite. You have to surrender. You have to submit to something greater than yourself that many of us call God, Jehovah Allah. And we seek the information and knowledge of the masters because, see, the reason that Robert Greene's book is so powerful, or have been, the 48 Laws of Power, is because he's a historian. And he all he did was show you historical cycles. And that's the same thing that they do in economics. They show you economic cycles. Well, we're speaking on spiritual realm, and we're speaking about the cycles of life. And that is understand functionality, sustainability, and adaptability. And drugs eliminate both all of those. Drugs no longer allow you to function, to sustain yourself, or to adapt. Because if you can't function, you die. If you can't adapt, you die. And if you can't sustain yourself, you die. So when you're operating from non-functionality and sustainability and adaptability, that's the world that creates a great deal of pain, and that's the world of drugs, which means that you're a dead man walking, and you're existing in a dream state. So that brings us back to the reptilian stem, because that's the neocortex. You have to get to the cerebral cortex, where your dreams and visions and imaginations, and not the drug induced dreams. Because after you consume drugs and get these dopamine rushes and so forth, you kill the real chemicals in your brain. Whereas if you get off the drugs, you can't experience pleasure because you go through withdrawal from the drugs, which have desensitized your whole natural process of being able to feel. So you have to go through withdrawal. And for many of us, this is also a spiritual realm. If you notice, the great spiritual masters, they had to withdraw from the world as well. And they would go, Jesus to 40, I think the 40 days in the wilderness, and Muhammad in the cave, and um, uh, um, Joseph in prison and in the well, but also in prison. So this isolation now forces you to go in yourself. And going into yourself, you have to go in what I call the darkness. Many of us are afraid to see our own demons, our own monsters, but that's what's necessary. You have to have courage, and courage is defined as the ability to operate in spite of fear. And what is fear? False evidence about reality. So these ghosts, the boogeymans, these are fictional things that we worry about. What is worry and anxiety except not understanding or knowing what the future is? We have anxiety and worry about something that doesn't even exist yet, because uh, and as we begin to come into knowledge and understanding, the anxiety and the worry dissipates or goes away, or is lessens or mitigated, as a word. They like these big words, but it lessens to the degree that we know and understand. We no longer fear. So we come and emerge from out of this darkness, and triple darkness. The darkness of drug abuse, the darkness of a lack of knowledge of self and who you are. In a hostile environment, there's a rose in Spanish Harlem. What? They came up out of the concrete, you see? And even in such a negative environment. And most of us understand that fertilizer is nothing but, of course, manure. But what is necessary for the cultivation of the earth. So we have to come through this trauma. We have to go into the basement of our own self. And we have to go down there, and the basement is dark. And it's most times could have a lot of dust, and could have cobwebs. And so we have to, sometimes we may not have anything but a flashlight, but we'll go down there. So anyway, our own house. It says, you know, don't put your candle under a bushel. So let your light shine. But in order to become enlightened, you have to come into knowledge, and that's the light that will look, and all those things that scared you, and all those, I'll call it guilt, shame. These are the enemies. Self-hatred, a lack of self-worth, a low self-esteem. These are the things that we a lot of times we're not conscious of. So we go right back through this, the ritualistic thinking of a cracked dopamine mind, animalistic instincts, perversely inclined. You keep moving in motion, you're stuck in time. So verily in time through the ages, man is in loss, except those who come together in the mutual teachings of truth, patience, and constancy. So we have to come together to assist each other, because a child, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a tribe. We have to come together and understand the unity and the oneness of all of us. I'm telling my story a little here, but we all have a story. And a lot of the philosophers say that, or that we live lives of quiet desperation. A lot of us are in our pain, but we won't call it an addiction. We won't call gambling an addiction. We won't call alcohol, drug. We don't. We because it's legally acceptable. You can gamble. You can drink alcohol, and now it's acceptable and legal for you to do marijuana. However, these are unnatural processes, but these are addictions and can be addictions nevertheless. And I'm not judging anything that anyone is doing. I'm just saying that we all cope and deal with stress in different ways. And you know, uh, because something is legal doesn't really make it lawful. Uh, just because something is legal doesn't mean that it's good for you. So um, we become stuck in time. Uh, and this is part of the Dauphine mind, stuck in time. And also, um, we keep reaching for hope because we have moments of sanity. We reach for hope, and we get in our own ways. We self sabotage ourselves because uh, sometimes we have to be removed from the environment or society, people, places, and things, as they say in the 12-step programs or the rooms. And sometimes when we may be able to get ourselves into a spiritual practice that will begin to uh, bring this enlightenment that's necessary to illuminate our own internal processes and the things we fear, which again, that's that false evidence about reality, the things that are unreal. You don't own the guilt, that wasn't yours. You didn't have a critical mind, perhaps, when you were traumatized as a child, but you carry this legacy, you carry this pain, and you don't know how to handle it because you were never able, because you became chemically dependent instead of maturing emotionally and able to deal with the traumas and the challenges of life. And so you reach for hope. In many instances, that's a spiritual awakening. And sometimes it's you relapse or you reach for this hope, but it says you reach for hope, but you come up with slime because the people in the environment, they don't really understand themselves, but they don't want to see you get out. They because misery loves company, as they say, and they will offer you the same people who, if you were short on money, they wouldn't give you no drugs, but if they see you getting your life together, they'll give you the drugs for free. Say, yo, man, I got this thing here, boom, they give it to you for free, and then your friends, and female and male, will entice you back into your addiction if you allow that. So you got to get away from a lot of things, and you have to escape from people, places, and things. Not so much escape, but remove yourself. And sometimes you're not, you don't intentionally do it because of criminal justice system and incarceration. But in some instances, it may be a protective custody because you were on a downward spiral and you were, uh, maybe not even understanding that you could have even been suicidal. Because I know now a lot of people that were afraid of me because I didn't care. And because I didn't care, I had no fear. And a man with no fear is a dangerous person. And then you give him a gun, and if all he wants, he has a false sense of power. But if you live by the gun, you'll die by the gun. But that's another story. So you reach for this hope, but you come up with slime. Why? Because you haven't dealt with the ritualistic thinking of the cracked Dauphine mind. You have to go in there and clean house. And I'm not suggesting that it's easy because you got to confront your own demons. You have to go in there and cry from the loss and the pain and the suffering. And in many instances, you can't do it by yourself. You got to know how to ask for help. But for a child that came up or in an environment where your manhood is based on you can't cry, you can't ask for help. I'll do it myself. And if you don't give it to me, I'll take it. But this is a mentality that it may have worked for you as a defense mechanisms in your early development. You know, like uh, that's a whole another part. But the environment that I was in forced me to be violent. It forced me to be aggressive. And when I was violent and aggressive, I got respect. So I thought that was the way of, of getting respect. But as you grow, that coping mechanism doesn't work when you become uh, uh, more sophisticated in your life, or if you are operating from another level of society and culture. It'll operate in that environment, but you'll be stuck in time with no rhythm around, creatures of habit, because of ritualistic thinking that cracked the open mind. So that is the poem that I wanted to elaborate on. Um, and you could DM me. You could visit the channel, um, King Khalil Speaks, um, on YouTube. You could also visit the channel on YouTube called 7K Medals, and I'm sorry, Seven Kings Medals on YouTube. And when you get there, you tap my picture and you go to the top on the right hand side as you subscribe, is where I would ask everyone to subscribe. But you go there and you hit the about, and it will take you down to other links that I have other websites, um, including KingKhalilSpeaks.com. That's KingKhalilSpeaks.com, where my book can be purchased, as well as on Amazon. My book is on Amazon. Uh, on YouTube is under King Khalil Speaks. On Amazon it's under Khalil Abdul Hakim. So um, that's a part of the journey for the day, from darkness into light, that I wanted to share with you. And hopefully, I appreciate your time, and hopefully, if there's something that I said was of benefit, of course, I feel like I'm a conduit uh, to be able to be blessed, to able to share my work and my poetry. Uh, and a lot of times I say it's not come from me, it comes through me because of inspiration um, and motivation that uh, I've been infused with as a result of surrendering to something greater than myself and allowing myself to become a tool and a vessel. And hopefully, this information will bring enlightenment and some light to this subject matter of chemical, uh, emotional, and psychological warfare and addiction, and hopefully give someone the insight or tool. We call it weapons or tools in spiritual warfare. Just like the weapons of the enemy are guilt, shame, darkness, triple darkness, all kinds of social influences and things. But the weapons of spiritual warfare that you have to defend yourself are compassion and love, the energy of the world, the glue of the world, the most powerful energy. And that's why the heart is the electromagnetic force in the body. And you don't want to have a dead heart. You want to have a heart that we have one saying, excuse me, that if one thing is ill in the body, the whole body is ill. And the question, the answer to that, what is that one thing? And it's the heart. If the heart is ill, all your systems of teaching and the masters have all taught about the compassionate heart. So with that, may you have a blessed day, and I hope that, and I appreciate your time, and your attention, and I'm going to end this now, and have a fantastic, blessed day.